as you are no doubt already aware, Tim Steidten has been approached by Barcelona not to become their director of football, but to become one of the team. They're in talks at the moment, apparently, and that's been disclosed by none other than Fabrizio Romano. He knows his stuff when it comes to Tim Steidten. It is quite telling when Steidten was at West Ham, Romano was breaking a lot of the West Ham news. Since Steidten's left, we've not heard a peep out of him about anything to do with West Ham. So, clearer confirmation, if anyone needed, that he was the guy that was doing the leaking of stuff at West Ham. I've gone through the whole range, not emotions, because that would be too strong a thought of it. I've gone through the whole range of thoughts with regard to this news and Tim Steidten since, I guess, the story broke 4 or 5 hours ago. I think initially I was embarrassed by it. I thought, well, this is embarrassing, isn't it, really? Because there is no doubting Steidten's talent for choosing a player. Say what you want about him, and we'll cover everything, because it'd be easy just to give one opinion on this. But the whole thing with Steidten was complex, and as ever, a lot of people fell on either one side or the other side of the argument. But I think you'd probably find that Steidten was probably very good at a lot of stuff and probably quite bad at a lot of stuff as well. But I couldn't help but feel a little bit embarrassed by this, a little bit disappointed, if you want, that West Ham had relinquished this person who was an excellent talent spotter, and clearly he is so highly regarded that Barcelona are going to appoint him. I mean, that's just not a good look, is it? I think the next thing that I thought about was, and I know the answer, it's a rhetorical question, but who appointed Steidten? Because whoever appointed him, Daniel Krasinski is the answer, had some foresight, or at least was well briefed by the people around him, which is, I think, is what happened with Krasinski. So somebody in Krasinski's team had football knowledge enough to know that this was a really good talent spotter and somebody that West Ham should be hiring. And that doesn't quite marry up in my mind, the fact that Krasinski interviewed him. Krasinski insisted on West Ham hiring Steidten. Yeah, he sort of had nothing to do with Steidten leaving. There was no pushback, it seems. So David Sullivan was almost allowed to do what he wanted in terms of getting rid of Steidten. Not only that having decided to appoint a director of football, I'm talking about Krasinski here still, we'll get on to Sullivan in a second, having decided to do that, he didn't then suggest an alternative director of football. So I think on the outside, West Ham don't look good. And by the way, I mean, not to give you a spoiler, I'm not going to come to the conclusion that it's a good thing anyway, but I just feel for balance it's probably right to give both sides of the story. Steidten had a reputation for falling out with people. He fell out with David Moyes. In the end, David Moyes banned him from the training room. Training room? What's the training room? From the dressing room and the training ground. Okay, not good for your director of football. And he liked to be about. He liked to be seen. He liked to be busy. He liked to be at the training ground. He liked to be in the dressing room before games. He liked to be involved, Steidten. Now, as I have been informed, this is very much the way things are done in Germany. The director of football is a really important role in a football club, and they are high-profile positions. I think still culturally in England, I think we're still coming round to that. I think we've already gone past the point where we know we need them, because it wasn't so long ago that it was just managers and you didn't need a director of football. I think now we know we need them. When I say we, I mean the English game, obviously not West Ham. But they're marginalised, they're sidelined. We don't want to hear from them, we don't want to see them. But Steidten wasn't like that. Steidten was very much front and centre of pretty much everything. Then he fell out with Julian Lopetegui. And it's like that whole thing, isn't it? About once is a shame, twice is a coincidence, 3 times is a trend. And then I didn't pay too much attention to it at the time. But I was told pretty quickly after we knew Potter was going to be appointed that he didn't want Steidten around. He'd met Steidten, he didn't want to carry on, he didn't want to work with Steidten. Now, at the time, that was very hard to believe that he didn't want to work with Steidten because the pair had been pictured in a hotel lobby months before Potter was even appointed, which gave the impression that Steidten was heavily involved in his recruitment. So that therefore, when you're hearing, well, you know, Potter doesn't want to work with Steidten, you think, well, hold on, the pictures I'm seeing don't paint that picture. Also, Steidten was at the first interview that Graham Potter had. Now, Graham Potter had 2 interviews, but quite tellingly, he wasn't at the second interview, which was strange because the second interview was held at David Sullivan's house, well, mansion, shall we say. And he wasn't there, and a lot of people were there. I heard there was 2 agents there. Karen Brady was there. David Sullivan was there. Both Sullivan boys were there. There was a lot of people at this meeting. But Steidten was everyone. Beryl, the tea lady. They're all there, apart from Steidten. So then when you start to factor that in, you start to think, well, hold on a second, there was something here. And bearing in mind, we already know that he couldn't get on with Lopetegui and he couldn't get on with David Moyes. Is it beyond the realms of possibility that he couldn't really get on with Graham Potter? No, it becomes a little bit believable. But it is a weird one with West Ham, and I think it's a hell of a risk, a massive risk for West Ham, what they've decided to do. And in many respects, they have gambled everything on this appointment, because I actually believe if the decision not only to appoint Potter, but to actually not bother with a director of football, if that fails, then there's no going back. You've got petitions, you've got protests, you've got a lot of stuff going on against the board at the moment. But I think ultimately, if this appointment fails, I just think there's no... I can't see that there's any way forward, because you'd have taken on the suggestion initially of Kretinsky, who is, whatever he is, 27% or whatever he has of the club. It's, you know, the second largest shareholder in the club. And you'll have taken that suggestion and basically thrown it out and then decided to go another way if that way fails. Particularly bearing in mind how much Karen Brady has pushed forward with this. Then you would just have to call into judgment pretty much everything off the back of that. Also, it's a risky strategy really just to go without a director of football at all. Even David Moyes, let's be fair. Even Moisey had, well, first of all, it was Tony Henry, and then he had Rob Newman. Going back in between Pellegrini, well, Pellegrini had Husslos. Now, you could obviously argue that Macaulay is in place for West Ham. But the risk is that we have nobody experienced to do it. And that's a hell of a risk. A hell of a risk. But anyway, before I go any further, today's video is sponsored by Match Bingo. You know what Match Bingo is by now. Surely, I didn't mean to call you Shirley. Basically, rather than you having numbers in a bingo game, you've got instants happening in a game of football. A throw-in, a goal kick, a corner kick, shot on target, shot off target, that type of thing. You have 15 things in 3 rows of 5 on your card. Every time an instant happens in the game that you've bought a ticket for, and the tickets are £2, it gets ticked off for you. First line of 5 pays out a prize. Second row of 5 pays out a prize. Full house pays out a prize. Bonus pot pays out a prize. 4 prizes on pretty much every single game. And if you use the link below and you've signed up via Hammers Chat, then if you buy 4 cards for a game, you'll get a 5th one free. If you're a new signee, new sign-up, then deposit £10, you get 20 quid. We've had over 300 winners in Match Bingo. It's low stakes. As I say, £2 a card. So you're not going to hopefully empty your bank account. Probably would empty my bank account, truth be known. But hopefully you're not going to empty your bank account by doing this sort of stuff. But it is 18 and over, because it is still considered a gambling app. So mums and dads only on this one, I'm afraid, boys and girls. Link is in the description below. And then do that, you'll get your discounts. I know you come from Hammers Chat. So the risk is to ditch this director of football, who clearly is good enough as a recruitment... well, not a recruitment director, but have a senior recruitment position at Barcelona, but not good enough for West Ham. Good enough for Barcelona, not good enough for West Ham. That sounds crap. I mean, it's a bit of a headline. It's a bit of a strap line, isn't it? But it doesn't tell all the story, or even half of it. Because this is the point. His talent spotting is really, really good. And it was all a little bit cloak and dagger, certainly during the summer. And I'm really open-minded on Steidten, right? So I'm willing to be convinced either way. I had it in my mind it was him that wanted Fulkrug, but I actually got corrected on that. And I was happy to be corrected. It actually turned out his first choice was John Duran, which I think was probably a really, really smart signing. It was the board that didn't back him, which I think is not particularly clever. I think you can't really criticise his judgment with a lot of the players that we signed. Also, it was him that wanted to sign Fofana rather than Alvarez. I've had that pretty much confirmed as well. But it's not black and white. I'm not all in, Steidten's brilliant and everything he does is fantastic, but also not everything he does is awful. Clearly a really good talent spotter. Obviously, he had a problem getting on with people. But I guess if you're not going to have the top job, that probably doesn't matter. And then you can absolutely understand how, with Ibrahim Osman, when he was negotiating with the wrong agent, stuff like that is a rookie error. Probably the sort of rookie error you don't get when someone is experienced at this stuff, right? So he made some mistakes. He absolutely did. Sort of understand that there was a much cheaper deal to be done for Luis Guilherme. I mean, much, much cheaper. He went over 3 times. In the end, he agreed to pay more than we needed to pay by about £7 million. So he did overpay, but he did tend to get the job done. He did come back with the players. The players liked him. Pretty much everyone that he signed liked him. So whilst he might not be able to get on with coaches and managers, he got on very well with the players. And then really this sort of becomes not about Steidten, and it becomes what I think it's incredibly... It's like arrogant, cocky, confident to decide we're not going to go with a director of football. We're not going to bother. So we come back to blind faith in Potter and Macaulay. And I know I keep saying it, but I will continue to say this particular thing. They have no experience. None. Not in buying players. Maybe in Sweden. But I even checked with Swansea. Potter did not buy players at Swansea, didn't buy players at Brighton, did not buy players at Chelsea. And all those 3 clubs, Macaulay was a data analyst. So, and I think, don't get me wrong, I think sometimes you it's right to place your faith in people. It's right to back people, and that's what we're doing. So these guys that have no experience, right, go on. In this window where I think most people would concede there's going to be the most activity there's been in a long time for West Ham, we're going to leave you in charge. You've got no experience at it, but we're going to leave you in charge. And maybe, just maybe, they have a hunch that they can do it. Maybe working behind the scenes, particularly Macaulay, having done all the number crunching, having done the data analysis, maybe he is thinking, do you know what? I can do this. I can step up. I've had a look. I've seen what these other guys can do, and I can do it. And that's great. If you can, but you're still looking at blind faith. And clearly the board have got a lot of faith in him, and clearly Potter's got a lot of faith in him, because Potter persuaded the board to pay Chelsea a £1 million release clause for this guy. Only time will tell whether that's proven to be good value or not. But I just can't help but think at a time when Barcelona come along and appoint Tim Steidten, or are very close to it, and West Ham have decided to go a very, very different way. I do find it odd. And I do find it odd that we have now got a head coach, which is what Potter has been all throughout his life, as we've now appointed him manager. He has the final say. I'm not sure if there's anyone in the Premier League that has that anymore. And before anyone says Potter, I've got it. Before anyone says Moyes, got it on really, really good authority. Moyes doesn't have the final say on transfers at Everton. He puts names forward, but that's not it. In many respects, the old style manager is gone, is defunct. It no longer exists. Apart from at West Ham, what a weird time for us to take a step back. Not that West Ham will be perceiving it as a step back. They'll be thinking it's a step forward. They'll be thinking, well, it's an improvement. on Steidten, because here's the point: when you have a confirmation bias, if you just want to know bad things about Tim Steidten, I can tell them to you. If you just want to know good things about Tim Steidten, I can tell them to you. Can you operate in that space in the middle? Well, I do wonder if West Ham have thought, well, do you know what? And they would know more than me because they've operated in the same building as him. They might be thinking, well, you know what? He didn't get on with Potter. Potter didn't particularly get on with him, wanted him out. He fell out with Lopetegui, fell out with David Moyes. He made some mistakes in player recruitment. That's the reasoning for not wanting him. And I think if the club have convinced themselves of that, and they are ignoring the things that he did well, then what can you do about it? There's nothing you can do about a confirmation bias. That's what it is. It's a bias, and when you have a bias, you're not going to shift from that. Could spend all day with West Ham saying, but you know, look at what he did in terms of his recruitment when he brought Kudus in. And I know maybe Kudus doesn't look brilliant at the moment, but that was a good signing. Maybe you could look at him and say, well, hold on a second. What about had we have backed him and got the striker that he really pushed for in John Duran? Might be looking at a very, very different season. And you know, there's other things as well. You know, it was Steidten, apparently, who negotiated Jarrod Bowen's 7-year contract. There's stuff. There are positives to him, and clearly there's enough positives for Barcelona to think, well, he knows his stuff. I doubt very much if Barcelona have spoken to West Ham and said, oh, can you give us a reference? Wouldn't be surprised if he's spoken to Leverkusen and Simon Rolfs and asked for one. And I bet it was glowing. I bet it was good. But yeah, I think ultimately I found it quite embarrassing news. I found it quite disappointing news. And I couldn't help but think, I felt that West Ham would miss out. But as I say, it's not plain. Maybe there was no way forward. Maybe Steidten had burnt all his bridges at West Ham and he couldn't continue. All we've heard is that he fell out with managers, coaches. Maybe he fell out with other people. They don't know. But I do think there's a really interesting dynamic. And the one thing in all of this, even though David Sullivan has the controlling interest, I think if I was Daniel Kretinsky and it had all gone down as I described earlier on in the video, I do think I'd be talking to Sullivan. I do think I'd be picking up the phone and saying, what's gone on here? Why has this happened? Why has this been allowed to happen? And okay, just because you didn't want or like the director of football that I recommended and interviewed, and okay, you got rid of him, why does that mean the whole structure of the club has changed and we're not having any director of football now? I don't know. Like I keep saying, hopefully this is not even an issue. Hopefully we get to the summer and West Ham are signing players and signing good players, young promising players. As I said, you know, once we sign a couple of decent players, I will chill out. I really, really will, and I'll stop worrying. But I was worried anyway about this summer recruitment. I think it's the biggest issue is not actually Potter's coaching ability. Whilst he might not play the most exciting football, I do think there's a competency to him. My biggest concern is recruitment and us getting the necessary players, because he's already proven he cannot coach the players we have. He needs his new players, and if we can't get them, then you do have to ask the question: why did we get rid of a director of football?